Do you recall connecting a lemon to activate a clock in science class? A piece of copper on one side, zinc on the other, and voila! Electricity from fruit. But what if I told you your garden soil is essentially a giant lemon, and two buried metals could supercharge it? In the 1840s, Alexander Bain, the inventor of the electric clock, used this very trick to power machinery and stimulate plant growth, until the technology mysteriously disappeared. Today, few ponder why. What truly became of the Earth battery? And could its use double your harvest, right under the nose of large-scale agriculture? The answer begins where electricity meets dirt, and nothing in your garden will ever appear the same again. In 1841, a Scottish clockmaker named Alexander Bain secured a patent that would subtly redefine the principles of electricity. Instead of relying on expensive chemical batteries, Bain embedded two plates, one zinc and one copper, into damp earth and connected them with a wire. The result was a steady current, drawn not from acid or salt water, but directly from the earth itself. This was no mere parlor trick or fleeting experiment. Bain's setup powered the world's inaugural electric clocks, their pendulums animated by energy coaxed from the soil. His patent, British patent number 8763, detailed how two plates of different metals placed in moist earth could drive gears and electromagnets without any need for winding or refilling. Bain recognized that the earth was its own battery, an inexhaustible one. Bain's earth battery was more than just a workshop novelty. It found its way into the heart of Victorian telegraphy, where the demand for dependable long-distance power was rapidly increasing. Telegraph stations across Britain began employing buried copper and zinc plates to transmit signals over single wires, with the earth itself acting as the return path. This earth return method, inspired by earlier German experiments, allowed operators to extend lines further and reduce costs. In Hyde Park and along the Edinburgh to Glasgow Railway, Bain's buried plates provided a clean, low-voltage current, often around 1 volt per cell, sufficient to mark paper tape at speeds that outperformed competing systems. These installations were not merely theoretical. Engineers documented how orienting the plates north to south and sinking the zinc deeper into the ground could boost output. Damp soil yielded optimal results. Dry ground caused the current to dissipate, and the system required diligent maintenance. However, under the right conditions, the earth battery operated for months without interruption. Bain's personal notes and patent applications from 1841 to 1843 describe a technology that was both straightforward and profound. Electricity harvested from the ground's chemistry, harnessed by nothing more than discarded metal and water. Other inventors soon followed Bain's lead. United States patents from the late 1800s, such as those by Daniel Draw and George DeMann, expanded on the concept, linking multiple earth batteries together to amplify voltage for clocks and telegraphs. The fundamental principle remained constant. Two dissimilar metals buried in moist soil could transform the ground beneath one's feet into a silent generator. In a pre-grid era, this was a revolution, concealed in plain sight. Bain's earth battery unobtrusively powered the Victorian world, silently operating in back rooms and beneath railway embankments. It demonstrated that the earth itself was teeming with current, waiting to be tapped. The narrative of what transpired next, how this technology receded from public view, begins with a simple observation. Wherever these metal plates lay hidden, something peculiar started to occur in the surrounding soil. Reports began circulating among telegraph workers and local farmers. In the moist fields where copper and zinc plates lay buried beneath the grass, something unusual was transpiring. Telegraph lines hummed faintly overhead, but it was the ground itself that captivated attention. A strip of grass running between the concealed plates stood out, darker, thicker, and taller than the patches just a few feet away. There were no fertilizer bags, no clandestine compost, just the quiet presence of two metals and the slow seep of current through the earth. No scientific paper documented these alterations. Instead, the story spread by word of mouth. A station master in Yorkshire pointed out the lush strip beside a buried telegraph return. A groundskeeper in Essex quipped that the grass seemed to know where the wires lay. The pattern replicated itself across muddy embankments and country lanes. Wherever the ground carried a steady current, nearby plants appeared healthier and more robust, as if they had discovered a hidden advantage. Decades later, a Connecticut physician named George Starr White took notice. White was no ordinary country doctor. He dedicated his career to pursuing nature's invisible forces, convinced that electricity in the soil could unlock new agricultural possibilities. In the early 20th century, he began promoting the idea that natural earth currents, which he termed electroelectricity, could be harnessed to boost crop yields. His lectures and pamphlets detailed experiments where weak currents channeled through the ground seemed to invigorate tired fields. White's assertions were bold, but he was careful not to promise miracles. The evidence was anecdotal: a patch of greener corn here, a row of beans that ripened early there. Most of what he offered consisted of observations and questions, not concrete data. Newspapers of the day occasionally mentioned these strange effects, though always in passing. One agricultural journal from 1915 described a farmer who swore his potatoes grew larger near a buried wire. Another clipping from the Midwest recounted grapevines that seemed to thrive beside an old telegraph pole. The pattern was consistently the same. No controlled trials, no official endorsement, just a persistent rumor that something in the soil was subtly enhancing plant growth. For many, these stories were little more than folklore. Yet, for experimenters like White, they hinted at a concealed layer in the soil's life, a connection between electricity and growth that science had yet to elucidate. The question persisted: was the earth itself nourishing these plants? Or was it merely an optical illusion? The quest for a genuine mechanism, one that could transform these disparate reports into a reproducible method, would follow. Copper and zinc, when placed in moist soil, do more than simply lie inert underground. They instigate a chemical reaction that transforms the earth itself into a living circuit. The scientific principle behind this is known as galvanic action. Here's what occurs. Zinc, being the more reactive metal, begins to lose electrons. These electrons travel through an overhead wire, seeking out the copper plate. The soil acts as the conduit, carrying charged ions between the two metals. This electron flow constitutes direct current, the same type that once powered Bain's electric clocks and telegraphs. However, in the ground, this current accomplishes something entirely different. At a microscopic level, the zinc plate functions as the anode. It releases electrons and gradually dissolves, releasing zinc ions into the surrounding soil. The copper plate, the cathode, accepts electrons and aids in completing the reaction. The soil's moisture is crucial. Water molecules, along with dissolved minerals and salts, enable ions to move freely. Without sufficient water, the current sputters and ceases. Under optimal conditions, moist, slightly acidic soil, the voltage between copper and zinc can range from approximately 0.8 to 1.1 volts. This may not seem like much, but it is enough to initiate a cascade of subterranean changes. This weak but steady current begins to break apart chemical bonds within the soil. Nutrients that were previously locked within stable compounds, phosphates, calcium, potassium, begin to shift. The process is termed electrolysis. As ions migrate under the influence of the electric field, some become more readily available to plant roots. It's as if the battery is unlocking a pantry that was always present, but tightly sealed. Plants, it turns out, can detect this voltage. Their roots are not merely passive straws absorbing water and minerals. Decades of plant physiology research have demonstrated that roots actively respond to electric fields, a phenomenon called electroropism. In controlled laboratory experiments, roots bend and grow toward the cathode, the copper plate. When exposed to even minute voltage gradients, some studies indicate that roots can detect fields as weak as 1 millivolt per centimeter. This effect is subtle in the wild, but in a garden with copper and zinc plates, roots are drawn into the zone where nutrients are most mobile. The result is a dual benefit: more available ions in the soil and roots that actively seek them out. This is not magic or wishful thinking. It is a documented response in plant biology. The field strength in a typical earth battery setup, around 0.5 to 1 volt across a few centimeters, corresponds to the levels employed in laboratory studies of root electroropism. The current also alters the soil environment in other ways, shifting microbial populations and even modifying pH near the electrodes. Under optimal conditions, gardeners and experimenters have measured voltage with a simple multimeter, providing proof that the system is functioning, even if the changes are imperceptible to the naked eye. The mechanism is straightforward, but the effects can be dramatic. With copper and zinc acting as silent underground partners, the soil becomes more than a medium for roots. It transforms into an active participant in the plant's life, channeling energy and unlocking resources that would otherwise remain inaccessible. By the advent of the 20th century, the subtle subterranean currents previously shaping agriculture were joined by a novel contender: synthetic fertilizer, which dramatically reshaped farming economics. In 1909, Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch successfully devised a method to extract nitrogen from the atmosphere, converting it into ammonia on an industrial scale. By 1913, Germany saw the inauguration of the first Haber-Bosch facility. Within a short period, the promise of affordable, plentiful nitrogen permeated Europe and North America. Tasks that once necessitated years of crop rotation or copious amounts of manure could now be accomplished with a single bag of crystalline white powder. The fertilizer sector did not merely market a product. It introduced a new philosophy regarding soil management. Advertisements from the 1920s and 1930s promoted record yields and abundant harvests with minimal effort, all achievable for the cost of a season's supply. Government agencies, such as the USDA, supported agricultural advisories that began advocating for NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, as the critical triad for modern farming. The underlying message was straightforward. Healthy soil was not a product of prolonged nurturing, but something acquirable, applicable, and repeatable. Farmers, compelled to meet the demands of burgeoning populations and compete in national markets, found this appealing. Synthetic fertilizer offered reliability, quantifiable results, and, crucially, reproducibility. Each successful harvest ensured future sales. The economic model favored expendable commodities over perpetually sustainable systems. Unlike an earth battery, which solely required 2 metal scraps and some wire, the contemporary model transformed nutrients into a subscription service. A permanent fixture, akin to Bain's buried plates, represented a one-time expense and yielded no recurring income. However, a sack of nitrate or phosphate guaranteed that customers would return the following spring. This shift transcended mere technological advancement. It represented a cultural metamorphosis. Farming periodicals from the 1930s are replete with accolades for chemical brands. These showcased comparative images of majestic corn and lush wheat, all credited to the latest formulations. Conversely, the venerable narratives of electric soil and buried plates receded into obscurity. USDA publications from the late 1920s outright dismissed electroculture, labeling it a mere curiosity devoid of practical utility for contemporary farmers. The scientific principles underlying galvanic soil currents were subtly relegated to the fringes, supplanted by the unequivocal data from chemical analyses and standardized yields. No clandestine documents or corporate conspiracies have emerged to substantiate a deliberate campaign against Bain's innovation. The historical record indicates a more subtle dynamic, a market that rewarded transient goods, not enduring solutions. As chemical enterprises scaled up their production and governmental bodies standardized their recommendations, the Earth battery was discarded, not through sabotage, but by the imperatives of profitability and the momentum of progress. The soil's quiet current, once a marvel of Victorian ingenuity, became an afterthought in the ammonia age. Nevertheless, the fundamental physics remained unchanged. The identical reaction that powered clocks and telegraphs continues to pulsate beneath our feet, awaiting rediscovery by a new generation. The pressing question now is whether the promise of free energy and vital soil can thrive in a world predicated on consumables. The answer might reside not within historical archives, but in the hands of individuals prepared to independently investigate this concept. A backyard gardener observes 2 rows of lettuce. One row features a copper pipe and a galvanized nail embedded in the soil, electrically connected above ground. The other row cultivates without any metallic intervention. After 4 weeks, the disparity is evident. The electrified lettuce exhibits greater height, broader leaves, and a more vibrant green hue. A digital scale corroborates the alteration. The average wet biomass in the electrified row measures 38 grams per plant, in contrast to 26 grams in the control group. This constitutes a nearly 50% increase, not quite double, but a significant enhancement. A multimeter probe contacts the copper and zinc. The display flickers momentarily before settling at 1.03 volts. This reading falls within the range reported by gardeners across various forums and YouTube experiments, typically from 0.8 to 1.1 volts, depending on moisture levels and soil pH. Growth curves charted over the month reveal that the electrified plants gained a lead by the second week and maintained it. Voltage readings are crucial and consistently indicate a measurable effect. The gardener meticulously records every detail: soil pH, daily precipitation, and voltage measurements. At harvest, a straightforward t-test yields a p-value of 0.04, marginally below the scientific threshold for significance. These figures do not guarantee a doubling of growth consistently, but confirm that something tangible is occurring. The current is not only measurable, but also actively influencing living plants. Converting your garden into a living battery requires only a few basic components. Begin with a segment of copper pipe or heavy-gauge copper wire. Approximately 6 to 8 inches generally suffices for most garden beds. For the complementary component, utilize a galvanized nail or a strip of zinc, also measuring 6 to 8 inches in length. These 2 metallic elements constitute the core of the system. You will also need an insulated wire of sufficient length to bridge the copper and zinc, with some extra to maintain the connection above the soil surface. Insert the copper into the soil on one side of the plant's root zone, roughly 6 inches deep. Position the zinc or galvanized nail on the opposing side, matching the depth, and spaced approximately 8 to 12 inches apart. The crucial factor is keeping them in moist soil, as the effect diminishes rapidly if the ground dries out. Strip the insulation from both ends of your wire, then tightly wind one end around the copper and the other around the zinc. Ensure the wire remains above the soil surface. This completes the circuit and allows for convenient monitoring of connections for corrosion. Once all elements are in place, verify your setup with a multimeter. Touch one probe to the copper and the other probe to the zinc. You should observe a reading between 0.8 and 1.1 volts. For optimal results, ensure the soil is damp and slightly acidic. Document your voltage and soil moisture levels every few days, and replace the zinc component if it exhibits significant corrosion. With this simple configuration, you are prepared to conduct your own experiment and track the outcomes season after season. Today, A basic copper and zinc circuit can still generate a detectable voltage from your garden soil. No patents or permissions are required. As industrial agriculture increasingly relies on external inputs, an overlooked energy source resides beneath our feet, quietly measurable with any multimeter. The scientific basis is well established, and the scope of what you can achieve is entirely at your discretion. Sometimes, the most potent current is the one we consciously choose. Would you like to reconnect? Share your insights or experimental findings in the comments below.